So in this video, which again I'm going to try and do my best to keep short, I'm going to talk a bit about the other reading assignment for this week. A short, obviously much shorter and much more straightforward than The Loss of the Creature, the National Park Service Centennial Essay Series and Introduction. There's two reasons why we're reading this. One, probably the most basic, is that if you've looked at the video and read the assignment sheet for essay number one, which you should do before you watch this. So if you haven't watched that yet, stop this, go check that out. The articles that you can choose from that assignment are all a part of this essay series. So this introduction kind of gives you some context for all of those articles. The second reason why we're doing this is because we started with something really difficult. And I think we did a great job with Walker Percy's Loss of the Creature, and people are continuing to work with that. Obviously, that work isn't done yet. As I mentioned, I'll respond to people's comments and try to make some connections among them in probably tomorrow. I wanted to look at something really straightforward that, let's say you were trying to summarize this, you would probably have a fairly easy time doing it, but also to point out a few of the extra elements I'm asking for on the assignment sheet. I know that these are going to be rhetorical summaries, so that we're not only going to talk about what the article says, we're going to do that, and that's important, but we're also going to pay some attention to how that message is expressed. And specifically, we want to think about audience, purpose, occasion, or context. Those we can use those terms interchangeably, I think, and style. So I'm going to talk through some of those things for the purpose of this article, just to give you a sense of kind of what we mean when we say them. Um, I think when I go back and respond to and look at people's responses to Walker Percy, I'll talk about how those concepts might apply to that essay as well, just to give you a lot of familiarity with how they can be applied, in hopes that you'll feel more comfortable doing that when you're working through an essay on your own. So let's first think about audience. One of the things, and one of the ways that this is really different than The Lost of the Creature, The Lost of the Creature seems to address kind of a very general audience. I think anybody could read that essay and get something out of it. I think Percy is very kind of self-consciously trying to address, like, a pretty big category, right? Like people who have experiences. Could be just about anybody. This seems much more narrow. So there's a few pieces of evidence we could point to that kind of show us that this is a narrow focus. One is when this person asks for, directly addresses the readers, right? We welcome the participation of George Wright Society members and other readers of the George Wright Forum in this ambitious journey of discovery. Now, even if you've never heard of the George Wright Forum or the George Wright Society, before you even Google it or look it up, one thing immediately we could probably note is that this is not readers of USA Today or the New York Times or a popular website, right? Huffington Post, BuzzFeed. This is something small. It's clearly a narrower, smaller audience, not something that's kind of written for everyone. Who exactly is that audience? Well, what's the George Wright Society? What is this thing? Before we even click, right? But by connecting science and management, we support leaders on the front lines of conservation for parks, protected areas, and cultural sites. George Wright Society champions stewardships of parks, protected areas, and cultural sites by connecting people, places, knowledge, and ideas. We're the only place-based conservation organized that is designed to be interdisciplinary from the ground up. A shorthand way of thinking about this is that the readers of this journal, the members of the society, are people who are already pretty invested in and knowledgeable about the national parks, about ecology, about environmental stewardship, and some of those issues. Right? So this is not directed to just kind of a person on the street who may have been to the Grand Canyon, but people who are more educated in and passionate about these issues. Those might include people, this seems to address, right, people who work in the Park Service, but also people who visit parks, people who are involved with environmental causes, those kinds of issues. Obviously they know these people must know something. If they're asking them for their contributions, right, they must have something to contribute. So by definition, right, this is speaking to an audience that is already somewhat knowledgeable on these issues and questions. What is the purpose of this article? Well, some articles, some essays, we might say they have kind of a vague purpose, right? They're just trying to inform, maybe they're trying to persuade us of something. This one seems like it has a very specific purpose, which is very literally asking readers to participate in the conversation. In other words, the authors of this article don't want you to just read the essay, they want you to read and then participate. We welcome the participation of you, right? Maybe you've got something you'd like to share, either in your own voice or simply by passing along an idea that you think one of the Centennial essays should address. We welcome that too. And you'll note here, right, that this ends with a kind of here's how you participate, here's how you send in your essay. So there's really a kind of invitation here, right? The purpose of this article, it has some information about history, right? It has some information about the current context, but it seems clear that the purpose is not just to inform, but also to invite participation. What is the context for this piece? What's going on in the world that this short essay is responding to? Well, there are a few things that seem really important. One, uh, it is uh, it is noting that on August 25th, 2016, the National Park Service will celebrate its 100th anniversary. This, however, was not written in 2016. It's written in, I believe, 2007, right? So what is the context? The context is the National Park Centennial is approaching. And so we want to prepare for it by doing these things. Um, what else is going on? Well, you can see from this article that the authors seem to be nervous that perhaps the National Park Service is losing some of its relevance. Not perhaps, um, there are conflicting interests of the past, present, and future that the Park Service needs to deal with. Here's an interesting piece of context that seems very unfamiliar, perhaps. When this is published in 2007, one thing we know already about the NPS Centennial is that present day needs will be attended by a great deal of public money. The day this was being written, it was announced that the Bush administration's proposed 2008 budget includes requests for increases in the NPS base operations budget. That would be the largest in the agency's history. In other words, this is not written at a time of financial crisis for the NPS. It's written at the time that the NPS was looking at larger amounts of funding from the federal government. This was written in 2007. As readers now, we know that the financial picture changed during the recession of 2008. Well, 2008 onwards, right? So it's a very different context that this is responding to. And some of the essays in the series, as they kind of get farther and farther out, you'll sort of see how those challenges become part of the context in a way that they're not in this essay because the author can't see the future. They're anticipating something that didn't quite come to pass. Um, Style. This is a really tricky one. Um, the author is speaking to people who are reading it who are knowledgeable and interested in the Park Service. They are trying to invite their participation. They are writing during a particular period where they're looking forward to a centennial and excited about resources and possibilities. What is the style they use? One of the things I would note is that this is a fairly optimistic and upbeat essay. It really does seem to want to invite people to participate. It does give some information. It gives us some facts and figures, but also it has a clear point of view. It has, I think you can really see the author's passion um, for the topic and for the National Park Service. So it's not like trying to be objective or merely to give information, right? You can sense that kind of optimism and upbeat tone throughout the essay. that's just a very quick rundown of what I would see as kind of the rhetorical elements of this message. Um, your rhetorical summary has to do more than that. It has to talk about what it says. I'm not going to spend time kind of going through and trying to re-summarize this. But in general, I think you'll find when you do essay number one that you will spend most of your time just in general kind of pointing out what the article says, and probably less time on the rhetorical elements. However, you also might notice that as you're kind of trying to figure out, okay, here's what this says, you probably will find that you end up kind of addressing these elements anyway, right? When you're talking about, okay, here's what this article is saying about global warming, they're saying X and Y and Z are happening, and therefore they advocate for this. Well, when you do that, you're talking about rhetorical elements. You're talking about the purpose of the essay. If you address who they are speaking to, right, you're talking about the rhetorical elements of the essay. So you might find that your summary kind of does, summary, here's what's being discussed, here are the rhetorical elements separately. You may find that they get kind of integrated fairly smoothly as you go, and either approach is fine. Again, we will talk about this a lot more next week when we read the essay by Holly Fretwell and the one by Marty Blatt. We're going to use those as examples to kind of figure some of these elements out on our own. But I certainly welcome your questions. If what I'm saying, if you watch this and you're kind of scratching your head saying, I don't know if I get it, let me know. Email me. I will put a channel on Discord for questions about essay number one, so we can kind of keep them in a central place. Let me know what is needs clarification. I'm happy to answer those questions.